Now, when we talk about the rural community's ability to adapt to climate change and the way climate change is impacting them, there's not like a one size fits all here, right? Because every rural community is different, the way they interact with climate change is also different. So the structural features of farm households and communities affect their vulnerability to climate change in complex ways. There's many major differences. For example, it depends on what economy they rely on, whether it be agriculture, fishing, forestry. All of those are impacted by climate change in different ways. It also depends on where they get their water from, whether their water is rain-fed or irrigated, right? Is it going to be impacted by climate coming out of the atmosphere or not because they're getting their water from a deep aquifer underground? It also depends on whether the people who live here are small-scale family farms or industrial-scale mega farms, right? This is also intimately tied into their social vulnerability. Do they have the assets? Do they have the funds to be able to handle future changes? But no matter what, they all require three similar things. They all need access to land and to other natural resources like water. They all need flexible local institutions to adapt to these changes. And they all need knowledge and information, which again is a wonderful reason why you are in this class, because you can provide that knowledge and information when you go on into a career in the environmental sector. Right? So bringing this all back to Georgia, let's think about which communities in Georgia are the most vulnerable. So a greater proportion of residents in Southwest Georgia compared to the rest of the state are dependent on natural resource-based industries like agriculture and forestry for their livelihood. Now, if you look at this map, you'll notice that that's also the area with the highest social vulnerability. And when I say social vulnerability, I mean people who don't have strong social ties to the broader community. For example, a lot of Hispanic people, many of whom are undocumented and have limited English proficiency, don't have a lot of support from the broader community for these reasons. And they make up a large percentage of laborers in Georgia's various rural climate-dependent industries, such as agriculture and timber. So when you put all of this together, you think about the areas that rely most heavily on agriculture, the southwest of Georgia, and the areas that have a lot of people with very limited social status, have high social vulnerability, they overlap in Southwest Georgia. Add to this where we have extreme heat, that's also Southwest Georgia. So these maps show extreme heat and how that's changing through time and how it will change in the future due to high emission scenarios. And you can see that the southern part of Georgia is the most vulnerable to extreme heat. So all of this is overlapping. Not only are they vulnerable to extreme heat, Southwest Georgia is also vulnerable to a decrease in water availability. They're not the most vulnerable out of all of Georgia. That's actually the northwestern portion. But Southwest Georgia, where we're looking at all of this overlapping, is expected to have a decrease in water availability. And again, looking at ground level ozone, this is smog, pollution, poor air quality. It's going to be high in Southwest Georgia. So putting all this together, the dependence on agriculture and forestry, the low social capacity, the heat stress, the lack of rain, the ground level ozone, it's all centered on southwestern Georgia. So southwestern Georgia is the most vulnerable to future climate change. If you paid attention, you might have noticed that northwestern Georgia is the least vulnerable. I'm not saying that they're not vulnerable, they're just the least vulnerable in our state.